So yeah, today we have Nader Dabit from Seattle. I don't know if I pronounced that well, but welcome, Nader. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing very good. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here. I know me and you have kind of known each other on social media, but this is our first time actually meeting like
Yeah.
live or virtual in person. So this is really cool.
Yeah, and I think that this is also a great time saver instead of just chatting for months, because this happened for me, for some of my guests. I've been chatting for months and then finally we did this kind of stuff. But in your case, I think it will be a little bit faster in this case. So, yeah, welcome. And I'd like to start a little bit with your story. How did you become a developer? Why? Your first experiences. So a little bit about you.
That
Thank you.
sounds good. Yeah. So like
Yeah.
right now, like you mentioned, I work with a team in Seattle for Amazon Web Services. I'm on the web and mobile team. I've been here for almost 3 years. So I started in January of 2018. And I've been a developer since around 2012, 2013, I think is when I started learning how to code and stuff like that. And I started off doing WordPress stuff and started, getting into JavaScript because I was in my first job working on a team that was building out a lot of Node.js and Cordova stuff back in kind of the early days of the big JavaScript kind of like revolution when Ruby and Rails was still extremely popular, but they were doing stuff with Angular, they were doing stuff with Node.js, they were doing stuff with Cordova. Got a really good, look at kind of that ecosystem early on, and that was really pivotal in my career, being around a lot of those people. And that was in Los Angeles. So I worked there for about a year in LA, bouncing around different places. Actually, I was still early in my career and I wasn't that good actually. Kind of let go. I got let go from my first job, landed a couple of short-term contracts. And from there, really kind of became really interested in single page application frameworks and also mobile development with JavaScript. So I started working a lot with things like Ionic and jQuery Mobile, even before that, at Cordova, and then React Native later on. Specialized in that, and React Native being involved in that ecosystem kind of like boosted my career. That was kind of like another pivotal moment. Being really involved in React Native, I wrote a book. I was very involved in the community, open source stuff, Stack Overflow. Ended up getting a lot of opportunities that kind of came out of that. So I did React Native stuff for a couple of years. Founded my own company, did consulting, and then joined AWS to kind of learn the other side of that. So I've been a front end developer at AWS. I'm able to kind of learn the back end and how to actually scale systems. So that's kind of been my interest lately is building full stack apps on the cloud.
Yeah, thank you. So you started small, as you said, and then let's say that you expanded a lot your knowledge. So yeah, especially so in mobile development. I used the Ionic a little, just a little bit. I've seen the capacitator thing.
Mm-hmm.
I know not that much about that. For example, I've published an application using Unity engine. So in that case, I use their engine. I'd like to publish something. I don't know if you have published something on some stores ever.
Yeah, I've published a few apps to the App Store
Yes.
over the years. I've helped companies that I worked with deploy their apps. I've published a couple of my own apps, and most of the stuff that I've done has been with Cordova and React Native. I haven't worked with Unity, but I've always been fascinated by game development, and also I know you can do other stuff with Unity as well, but I haven't really gotten a chance to do a lot with it. But it seems awesome.
Yeah, yes, sometimes it's it's too much stuff. Yes, to learn, yeah, I start like I wanted to learn everything. Yeah, and after a couple of years I basically gave up about that, and I just focus on maybe a little bit about DevOps and JavaScript, and that's it. So sometimes it's hard to choose some technologies, and which one is your favorite one, because you have already tried many. You have talked for like 2 minutes and just
My
say
favorite
that.
one right now.
Yeah, right now.
Um, oh man, there's so much stuff that I'm really
I
interested
know.
in right now. I think what I really am liking is seeing the maturity of a lot of the things that I've used over the years. Like right now, we're really seeing like a mature ecosystem of where React has kind of been, you know, had a lot of changes over the years. And then lately, we haven't really seen a lot of changes because it is so mature. And we're starting to see the maturity of React kind of being exponentially then replicated by these other companies that are building on top of it with things like Next.js and Gatsby and Blitz and all of these other different frameworks that are out there that are pretty cool. So like my favorite technology is still kind of like on the front end, React, just because I'm a believer in finding one thing that does something really well that you can use like for a lot of different things. So finding like a tool that works a lot of places. So React, you can build web apps, mobile apps, desktop apps, all types of stuff. You can build single page applications, server rendered apps, all with React. So React, I'm still huge on that. And seeing the massive adoption around the world, big enterprise companies, startups, everybody's using it. And I don't really see that stopping anytime soon. So on the front end, I'm still big on that. And then on the back end, I mean, I work at AWS, but I'm also like super interested in the general, you know, field of cloud computing and making it more accessible to developers. I think one of the tough things that cloud has traditionally been, it's been really hard for people to get started, and it's been really complex. And when you open up something like the AWS console, you see a million things and it's just really confusing. So I think one of the things that I'm extremely passionate about is lowering the barrier to entry to cloud computing, to front end developers, but to all developers really, because cloud is kind of like something that breaks down a lot of barriers. First of all, you can build scalable apps that you might not have been able to do without understanding how to use cloud computing. You can make a lot of money. You can do consulting, and you can make you can bring a lot of value to your company. A lot of positive things come out of understanding how to do this stuff. And you know, showing people, teaching people how to do it has been really, really fun. And also learning it myself, you know. I only know like a small percentage of it. I'm able to do a lot now,
Yeah.
but there's so much more to learn.
Yeah, but it's too new to know everything before actually starting to teach something, because if we start to learn everything before actually teaching that, basically it gets outdated already.
Yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah, it's so much stuff. I mean, every day there's something new too that comes out. Even like one person can spend like a couple of years specializing in just like a handful of these hundreds of services and still not know everything. So impossible, I think, to know everything. But I think once you come to that realization, everything becomes a little easier because you're a little less hard on yourself, you know?
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, because I also use the AWS sometimes. For example, I'm really interested into the DevOps world. I like Docker a lot. I don't know if you know that, for example, but use the AWS console is a little bit scary at the first time. So I think this is where you can give a lot. I think, because if you know everything about that, to help people to get started with that, I think that I don't know if you have done something about that. For example, this is one of the topics that it's really interesting for me. Have you ever done, I don't know, one video, or have you talked about that? Because to get started sometimes it's really hard. I know many developer friends, they say, I just opened the AWS console and I just was scared and I closed that. I think this is where AWS should work a little bit more, because it's wonderful, but as this just a step in the beginning, which can be a little hard. Do you agree with this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I haven't really created, that's a really good idea. Just maybe I should create just a video that kind of just walks through the console and kind of breaks it down and tries to make it a little easier, and kind of points out, look, you don't need to know all this stuff. Let's just take a look at like these three things or these four services, and you can do like all this stuff with just these things. I do have a lot of content and things that I've done to kind of teach people. I've written 2 books. I have a YouTube channel. I do a lot of blogging. I do a lot of documentation on the official AWS blog, but most of my videos are a little niche in the sense that like I don't really talk about a broad topic. I typically like break something smaller down and show you how to do something with like 1 or 2 things put together. But but yeah, I mean, I'm definitely interested in that space though.
Yeah. Do that. We'll promote that. I also promote that on Twitter. You can send me a message. I'll promote that video or whatever you want. So keep this
Okay,
in
I'm gonna
mind.
do
Keep
that. I'm
this in
gonna take you
mind.
up on
Keep
that.
this in mind, please. Yeah.
I mean, my channel is I'll go ahead and plug it here. It's youtube.com/Nader Dabit.
there. Is
So that's
there.
like my name, Nader Dabit. And I
Is
pretty
is
much
over
do
there.
oh yeah, it's oh yeah, okay,
Yeah.
it's on your screen back there.
Yeah.
I do full stack cloud. That's kind of like my thing I'm focusing right now is cloud and full stack cloud. So typically I'll show like how to build a back end and connect it with the front end. Or if I've like already done the front end part, I might just do a video showing how to do additional things on the back end. But like to me, the really interesting part is like the where the back end and front end meet and kind of how to make these things work together. Because like as a front end developer, always understood the front end part, but I never really understood the back end part. I meet a lot of back end developers that kind of understand how to build systems, but they don't know how to kind of connect them and make the UI and make it all work together. So I think it's super fun actually to build out these full stack apps.
Yeah, and for example, this is my favorite part. The connection between front end and back end. For me, as a developer, is if we wouldn't haven't been paid, we just could code with the same paycheck. Maybe I'll do that all day long because this is my favorite part. Yeah, so really the connection between the front end and back end. So yeah, so we have
Absolutely.
in common. This is very fun. So I totally agree with you. This is really, this is where where you see that things really get get in shape, that you see that the two world, because sometimes we also say these words like front end, back end, they looks like two different words, and then we can connect them. So yeah, this is also one of my, I think this is my favorite part. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for this. Okay, yeah, yeah. You talked about consulting, yeah, before. So can you talk a little bit about that? What are you doing
Yeah,
now? What have you done?
before I joined AWS, yeah, I was doing consulting and I kind of started really the first time I actually kind of learned how to code. My mind has always been in the consulting game. Like I've always been interested in it, and I consistently dipped my toes into consulting and tried to make it work. Between a lot of the gigs and the jobs and stuff that I've had in the past, but nothing seemed to really work early on for the first few years. Like I was never really able to make enough money to feel like I was, it was worth my while. And I quickly learned like if you're a good developer, you can actually make a lot more money at first just working for someone else. And when you're working for someone else, you're building your skill set, and you can spend maybe a little of your time on the side building a name and a brand for yourself if you don't have that yet. But you can still like pay your bills. It's kind of the best of both worlds at first. And what I learned is like after you spend a couple of years being a developer, if you have built up an expertise and you've spent a little bit of time like building your name and your brand online, you can actually do very well in consulting. So when I was working at the last startup before I went into consulting, I was doing a lot of stuff in the React Native ecosystem. I would spend a lot of time on Hacker News. I'm sorry, Stackoverflow, and refresh like the screen every few minutes on the React Native tag to see if there was like a new question, and I would try to answer it immediately. I did that for a few months, and I built up my reputation there, and I started getting a lot of people reaching out to me for work there, which was interesting. And then I started getting people reaching out to me to write books. I wasn't too interested at first, but I got approached by Manning Publications, and Manning is like a pretty solid company to write for. And at the time, I didn't really have much of a reputation, so I was like, okay, maybe if I write this book, it will help boost my reputation in this community. So I did that, and even before the book got published, when I was able to just start talking about the book, I started getting a lot more opportunities coming in for consulting. So basically using the quote unquote like expertise or the perceived expertise that people thought that I had, I was getting a lot of consulting opportunities like without me even trying. So like I was working full time at this point, and I was like, okay, this is the thing that I really used to really hope for, and I never had it happen. And now here I am working a full time job, and I have all these opportunities coming in. I'm like turning them all away. Let me see what I can do and try to like make this work. So the one thing I kind of learned from a really very thought full process where I kind of spent a few months trying to kind of understand the consulting business from people that were very successful in it, is that billing hourly is fine, but there's also this area where people are doing these value-based contracts and also teaching and training. And I found out that the people that were doing the training and the value-based contracts were making a lot more money than the people that were doing the hourly rates. So I hired a couple of people that were doing really well for these 30-minute to 1 hour consulting gigs where they could basically teach me consulting. And I found out that the training, especially before coronavirus, I don't know how it is now, but on-site training was very, very lucrative. You can charge these bigger companies in the range of like $5,000 to $20,000 for 1 day of work. Whereas if you wanted to bill hourly, that would just be really way too high for you to actually do that. So I started doing training, and I put up a website called React Native Training, and immediately I just became swamped with customers. I was turning them away, and I was only able to take maybe like a small percentage of them. But I was able to then pick and choose like what are the best contracts, where can I make the most money, and I started doing training. So I did training for about a year and a half. Most of the training gigs would be 2 to 3 days, and then you would be able to kind of loop them into a short-term contract for helping them prototype or do like some type of app development for their team, kind of get them started, or maybe just do code reviews. But typically the training would turn into a very lucrative consulting contract as well. And you would be able to charge a lot more per hour because they just perceived you as the expert. And therefore, you just charge whatever you feel like because you have extra business coming in and they know they can trust you. It's kind of a good place to be in consulting. So yeah, I mean, that's my experience. And I think that I learned from other people, and I like learning from other people. So hopefully someone listening kind of can pick out a few things that they might be able to learn from what I did that worked for me, and maybe it'll work for them. Everyone's situation is different. Every time and period in time is different. So everything is not going to work for everybody, right? So that's what worked for me.
Yes, sorry, but I didn't know about your story. It has been really interesting. So basically, you choose one topic. So let's say React Native, and I think that by refreshing that page on Stack Overflow, I think it paid off. We can say that, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you're answering questions for other people, helping other people, it could be GitHub, it could be Stack Overflow, it could be Twitter, wherever. You're basically learning for yourself as well, because half of the time or 75% of the time, I didn't know the answer. I would create a new React Native project. I would build out the problem. I would solve the problem, and I would gain knowledge. And the knowledge was transferable in a couple of ways. I would answer the question, and I would get some reputation, which led to people reaching out to me. When I got work, I was able to actually build faster because I knew a little bit more than I would have if I hadn't done that. So I'm able to bring more value to my client. It's kind of like this snowball effect, right? I mean, and I think that specializing tends to do that. In my experience at least, you tend to make a lot more money specializing because you become so good at this thing. You're a lot more efficient and you're a lot better, and you're able to charge a lot more. And even when you charge a lot more, it's still cheaper for your client, because if you can develop this thing at this quality and do so maybe faster than someone else, then they're saving that opportunity costs. They're saving the money that they might lose for someone that wasn't going to build it properly. And there's a lot of things that kind of like snowball when you start thinking in that way.
Yeah, so basically by solving other problems, first of all, you started by helping people, I think basically for free on Stack Overflow forum. I don't know if you ever get paid for something, but
It's
I
all
think,
free. Yeah, it's free.
yeah, I think in the beginning, is that you started by giving answers. I think if you give answers to people, they start to recognize you as an expert, and this is totally deserved, I suppose. So I think this is the best way where you can become an expert on a field. Also, it's the same for me for Docker. So when people start asking me questions, of course I've not the answer perfect anytime, but sometimes I need, or maybe the most of times I need to look for that answer. Maybe a little bit advantage if you had already a lot of questions, maybe you know where to look for. This is the only advantage that we have.
Exactly.
At least we know where are the documentation, where are the best videos, the best resources, even for us. Because sometimes people,
yeah, absolutely, that's part of it.
Yeah, sometimes people
knowing what to Google.
Yeah, of course. Yes, and I don't think that this is cheating. We are just humans. We have so many different questions, different specific questions. So sometimes we need to, I don't know, look for that answer. But this process for us to look for that answer, give to people, they are happy. Also, we are happy. So everyone is happy. Basically, I love this mindset. Maybe it's a bit hard in the beginning, because I think in the beginning it's a bit hard to start to getting these answers to people. Sometimes it can be
for sure, totally hard at the beginning. I mean, but inevitably you will know something that someone else doesn't know, and over time, like I mentioned, in my opinion, when you choose the route of specialization, you will be less, I guess, drawn away from this one thing doing other things, because you're not really focused on other things, you're only focused on one thing. So instead of like trying to learn 10 things, you might want to like learn this one thing, and then instead of you're spending 10x time like on this one thing, and you'll start getting into like the nitty gritty and understanding the underlying edge cases, all these different things, and that knowledge will start snowballing. But yeah, at first it is hard. Like you just have to you know buckle down, and unfortunately sometimes spend a little extra time doing something if you want to kind of like excel in that one area. And some people have more time than others. If you're a single young person and you have money, then you might have a lot more time to spend. If you're married and you're older and you're switching careers and you have kids, it could be a lot harder. So it's different for everybody's situation.
Yeah, I know. I've seen maybe a picture of your son. I don't know how old is that picture, but I don't know. I don't know, because I've seen maybe in my life so many people that they have so much free time. Maybe they are single, they are rich, but they are a little bit bored. So it's not about only that, because I've seen people in a lot of difficulties without money, but still they want to do that. So yeah, I really admire that kind of people, because I know the struggle that we are all different. We all have our difficulties. For someone else it's even harder, but yeah. So I think we can try to do something, even if there are a lot of difficulties in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing that everyone, that is listening, we can all do one thing. We can do our best. And as long, like, I feel like when I lose at something or I fail at something, I don't really take it personally, as long as I can look back and be like, okay, I tried my best. If I look back and I said, oh, I could have done this better or that better, then I get frustrated, because I'm like, okay, maybe if I had done this. But if I know for sure that like I did everything I could and I failed, then I feel pretty good about it, because I gave it my best shot. And I think it's the same way with learning. You do what you can to learn. You do what you give it your best. You look at all of the different things that are out there, and you take advantage of all of those things that are there. So tools, you know, things that are online, videos, tutorials, whatever. And you kind of try to do everything that you can. And at the end of the day, you're gonna just be able to learn whatever your brain allows you to learn.
Yeah.
And you have to be happy with that, I guess.
Yeah, and basically the perfection for developers, it really doesn't exist, because you can learn everything about React Native. Tomorrow they release another version, so maybe not from zero, but you need to update constantly. This was, for example, one of my mistakes in the beginning. I thought about, okay, now I focused on maybe basically all the JavaScript front end frameworks. I learned a little bit of all of them, but the hard part is to stay updated on that. So I basically had to choose something. Yeah, so basically to stay updated on that, because to choose one topic and stay updated on that, it's kind of a lot, in my opinion. I don't know if one person can do with two topics or three topics. I admire them, but I can do that, for example. So this is the one of the hardest part, because if you learn everything but you don't use that front-end framework for 6 months, maybe you already know something, but you start getting, I don't know, maybe some wrong answers. I think you can give also, yeah, wrong answers. It's a bit hard.
And you said that you're like specializing or doing a lot of stuff in Docker. That seems to be a really good area to be in. That seems to be really popular. Containers in general seem to be really, really hot right now.
Yeah, I really like that. It was not how I started, but this is how, for example, I'm trying to do some videos, helping some people. And yeah, basically, I started this 3 years ago, maybe 4, but then we started to use that in production environment from where I work, and so I had that good advantage also with my colleagues to have studied that already for 2 years alone, just by myself. So this has been a really great advantage for me and by you. Of course, I think that for everything, but for DevOps things, if you use them every day, it's very, very good, because you need to stay updated, know the process, all the things that could go wrong. So yeah.
Is there a lot of opportunity right now? Like,
Yeah.
do you feel like there's a ton of work in that area, Docker and containers? So you getting a lot of things happening?
Yeah. I've seen also they are also trying to connect, for example, AWS and Docker, and also Azure. So I'd like to watch that part a little bit. I don't know if you ever watched that. I don't know if we can work together on that one day. But yeah, I'd like to see that part. I really like this kind of to learn the basics, the fundamentals of one word. Of course, now there are a lot of maybe some things even more evolved things like Kubernetes, service meshes. There are a lot of things, but I think that getting the core ideas is the most important part for me. So, for example, I'm studying Kubernetes by myself, service meshes by myself, but I'm not putting out things just because I've watched a couple of videos and I've tried something by myself. For example, this is, for example, because sometimes I want to learn a little bit about that before starting to, I don't know, teach something. I don't know if that is your case. I think it also depends on the technology you use, but that's it for now. Yeah. So yeah. Yes. So I think, yeah, we have talked about a little bit of things for now. Yes. So we can talk about the modern full stack development, GraphQL a little bit. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, modern full stack development to me means that you're basically taking advantage of the tools and things that are out there that are currently, I guess, being maintained and that you kind of see like being adopted at scale. So like modern to me like would be something like a React or a Next.js front end with like, some sort of back end that is, maybe backed by a cloud provider, or maybe something like, if you just need a few functions or something like that, maybe Netlify, or maybe even Vercel for something like that as well. But the thing that I'm really interested in is kind of this idea of full stack cloud computing. And a lot of the things that I do are kind of, again, focused on that. And one of the things that I've really been noticing, not only at AWS, but kind of like at Microsoft and Google, is kind of their attempts to lower, again, the barrier to entry to cloud computing. And a lot of the focus is actually focused towards front-end developers. So like a front-end developer understands certain things, like for the most part, we understand how to work with APIs already. We already understand typically how to write JavaScript. If you're a native developer, maybe not so much, but you do understand how to work with APIs. So you're seeing an explosion of kind of these managed services that are being made available, not only like at AWS, but just everywhere. I mean, you can see dozens and hundreds of startups who create a single thing that is a managed service, like Cloudinary is a managed service. These these providers that do the CMS. They're kind of like a managed service, right? These are kind of like managed services, and you're just seeing an explosion of them. And the great thing about them is you don't actually have to be a back-end engineer to like stand up all of this infrastructure and all these APIs. You just like, sign up and you pay like, whatever for their usage, if it's serverless, or maybe some monthly fee, and you're able to kind of take advantage of all that functionality. So what you're basically seeing is like the cloud providers are starting to move into that space as well, offering these managed services. So you don't actually have to build out this backend infrastructure yourself. You can kind of take advantage of these managed services. And when you do need custom business logic, write that in a serverless function. Write your JavaScript or your Python there, and that therefore you have your custom business logic there, and then you have all of your things like authentication, APIs, image storage, all that stuff dealt with you for you by managed services. So to me, like the modern full stack cloud is kind of like a combination of front end framework of choice, whatever that is, and taking advantage of like one of these back end cloud providers. If you need the full like cloud, maybe it's using something like AWS, GCP, or Microsoft. If you just need a few things like functions, either use the cloud itself, cloud native, or maybe use one of these providers that kind of builds on top of AWS, like Netlify or Vercel. So yeah, I kind of am really interested in that space, because like what a single developer can do now is kind of build out the end-to-end solution. Whereas before it would take like a dozen people, because you would need a DevOps person, you would need a database person, you would need an infrastructure engineer, you would need like an API developer, front-end developer, maybe not a dozen people, but sometimes a dozen people, right? It just kind of depends. And then you have to think about stuff like security, authentication, authorization. That stuff is hard, and it's very hard to do at scale. So being able to kind of take advantage of a team that spends their entire life that for years working on that one thing, you can kind of assume and be pretty confident that it's going to be scalable and secure, and you don't have to build that yourself.
Yeah, I think that we are no more in the 19th. The times really passed now. I think that now we write maybe less code. I'm not. I don't know if we will ever reach that no code era where we can basically get relaxed and maybe do something else. I don't know about that, but I think that yeah, we are in an era where we can write less code, and we need to manage that. Do you agree with that? This is where we are going to. Maybe smaller teams. Teams are very specialized people. Maybe they know what to do, but not too many. I think it depends, of course. It depends if you work on Amazon or Netflix. Maybe they are kind of big teams, of course. But I think that a small group of people can do pretty well now. Maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it was really harder, really harder to compete also. Yeah. So
I agree.
Yeah. So that's it. So yeah. So you also have a very good experience with public speaking, right? Yeah. Can you tell us, for example, for your experience with public speaking, the first speech, because it's really a question that I really like, because I really want to know how did you, if you remember, how did you feel, when was that? Because
I can remember very very well. Like, so I mean, I kind of got into public speaking really slowly when I moved back to Mississippi from LA. When I was there for, like I mentioned, like a year and a half, I moved back to Mississippi, and there were no meetups. I had been exposed to meetups in LA, but in Mississippi, we didn't have any meetups. So like the first thing I did when I came, I was like, we need a meetup. So I created a meetup, and I couldn't, have anyone, I couldn't find anyone to speak at first. So for the first few meetups, I spoke at every meetup because I didn't have anybody to speak. And then slowly I started getting other people to speak, but really over time, I still would end up speaking at a lot of the meetups. So that was kind of my first experience speaking. And that was really nice because I was able to speak in front of a small group of people, and I didn't really feel too judged by these people. They were just happy to be there, and it was cool. Over time, I actually created a local coding school in Mississippi, and it was lasted for maybe 2 years. And we used to have groups of anywhere between 2 people to like 15 people. We didn't charge any money for the most part. We had a couple of classes where we did, but for the most part, all of them were free. And that was also giving me a little more experience. So I kind of really had small experience at first because I was always very nervous in front of large groups. But what I noticed was like people that were involved in the conference circuit tended to get a lot more opportunities, at least from what I could tell. So I was like wanting to get involved in that conference circuit. So I ended up deciding to submit a bunch of talk proposals across a bunch of conferences, and no one really accepted me except for this one conference, and it was called I forgot the name of it actually, but it was at the United Nations in New York City, and that was like the first conference I'd ever gotten accepted at. So I thought this was like really cool. So I was like, yeah, I'll take it. So I accepted the talk. I ended up having to pay my own way to go there, so I paid myself. I had to pay to fly there. I paid for my hotel, but I got to speak at the United Nations, and that was awesome. And it was my first conference talk ever. I was really, really nervous, but I think it went okay. Like it probably wasn't like really great, but I think I didn't do terribly. So after that, I had a little bit of confidence. And after that, I kind of was really interested in speaking. Being there and doing that whole experience was really fun because I got to travel, and I knew that in the future, if I was going to be accepted, I would probably have an opportunity for the conference to pay my travel. So I was like wanting to try to get some of those opportunities. So I started, submitting more and more talk proposals. Very, very low acceptance rate. Probably 1 out of every 50 would accept me. I think my second talk was at Chain React in Seattle, and that was interesting because that was really my first like community event where I knew people that were there, and it was kind of like a big deal. And what I ended up doing was like I ended up changing my conference talk like name and proposal at like the last minute. So I kind of switched it up, which is probably not the best thing to do. The organizers don't really appreciate that, but I didn't really like feel passionate about the talk that I was going to give. And the talk I ended up giving was kind of weird. It was called JavaScript Futurism, and it was at a React Native conference. I got a lot of mixed feedback. Some people thought it was interesting. A lot of people thought it was really dumb, and told me it was stupid. But it was a cool experience because I was talking about something I was really interested in, and it was fun. And then after that, I started becoming a little more serious about it. So I would put together more serious talk proposals. I would submit them, and I was still pretty low on the acceptance rate for the most part. But after I joined AWS, I actually got hired at AWS partly because of my abilities and my track record of being able to speak. Because I work as a developer advocate, and you've had a few people on your show, I think, that are developer advocates. But if you're a developer advocate, you're expected to be able to go out there and speak. So if you've done that before, it's easier to get hired. So that kind of helped me get this job, which is pretty interesting. And from there, since once I joined AWS, people start reaching out to you a lot more because you're working at a well-known company, so it's a little bit easier to kind of get accepted. So now I do a lot of speaking. But I would say if you're interested in getting into public speaking, start off small. Unless you can start off big, do that. But if you don't get accepted there, start off with some meetups and stuff. Get a little bit of speaking under your belt. And you'll see that if you start getting into it, you do start getting a lot of opportunities coming your way. I've had a lot of people reach out to me for collaborations, for consulting, for being on podcasts, speaking at other events, just from and also job offers, all kinds of stuff. So I would say it's a good thing to do for your career if that's your thing, if you're interested in it.
Yeah. I'd like to say two things. The first thing is that I noticed that what you said about public speaking, it's in some ways similar to what you did with Stackoverflow. So you started small, and then you keep growing. So maybe this is your style, that you start doing something, maybe for free, maybe with few people, and then you feel that and I think this is also for you to understand if you really like that. So you don't start just by doing some strange thing, and because I think that sometimes if you do maybe the first public speaking with maybe 1,000 people, we can really get scared and never do that one again. I think instead, in your case, I see some analogies from your experience, Stack Overflow and your public speaking. I think you were pretty lucky because I've talked with many people that they just get pushed in front of a lot of people and they just started to to talk. So I think in your case you were pretty lucky. So if you do some experience with that, you can always improve. Okay, I remember now that it's very hard from the people, for what I heard from people, that they start public speaking and then they stop because they don't like. Usually we all say it's hard to get started, but then when you get better at that, you want to do more. It's even my case. So I think this is something that you should try. I'm not talking to you, but to the people that are watching this video, of course. So maybe this is something that I heard from a lot of people, that maybe they were a little bit anxious about that in the beginning, but then once they start, yeah, and they want to do more and more. So yeah. And how many people were there in New York?
There was probably like 200 people there, which was big deal for me. Pretty nervous.
I did my very first public speaking with Danny Thompson. Invited me in a webinar one month ago, and I watched the people, and I watched like 100, then 200, then I stopped watching that number. I just did, the speaking without thinking about the number. It went pretty well. It lasted like 1 hour and a half. I got a lot of questions. I don't know if I answered them all, but it was a pretty great experience. In my case, also I starting in this strange year, so it's hard now to get like really real meetups. So we need to do something about that. So we do this kind of remote stuff, and that's it. So I don't know if you have done something. Your last public speech was when was that? The last one?
I mean, I've done a lot of virtual conferences, but my last in-person event was actually in March, and it was in Tel Aviv, Israel, and that was kind of my last trip. That was the first day of March. I think it was actually March 1st or March 2nd. That was when everything was starting to get shut down, and I flew back to the United States and haven't left the United States since. But I mean, going back though to speaking and like people that quit, and of course speaking isn't for everybody, but like I would say it's not going to be easy at first, and it is going to be challenging in a couple of different ways. First of all, you're going to have to put together your presentation and come up with ideas and things like that to talk about, and then second of all, you're going to have to deal with the stage fright and the anxiety and all that stuff. For me, that actually never goes away completely. I still get all of that every time. I think the one thing I've been able to do a little bit better over time though is uh have more efficiency in my presentations. So like at first it was very stressful and hard for me to put together a presentation. I think with practice that actually gets a lot easier, and you can kind of learn things along the way, like reusing certain parts of certain presentations, reusing designs, finding something that just works for you. So for me, live coding, it works really well for me because I'm able to show how to do a lot of interesting things, and I'm able to kind of explain it, and I'm able to do it bug free because I save my code snippets, and people typically like to see live coding, and it takes a lot of stress away from me because I don't have to prepare as many slides. So I can kind of prepare an introduction and then I do the live coding, and that explains, and that's kind of like my style. So everyone's style is different. And I would say like, if you feel like you had a bad experience and you want to give it another shot, then do that, and don't give up if you feel like your first experience was hard, because that's not easy for anybody.
Yeah, I think you can give yourself a second chance if you had a very bad
Exactly.
experience. Yeah, so yeah, but I think that now that I've done my very first public speech, I don't think that I'll yell at one people who just say, okay, this is my very first speech, because yeah, in the beginning it's very hard. I'm also doing this kind of interviews, and actually I started making these interviews because of that speaking, because otherwise I'd never started making these kind of things. I think that I'm speaking currently in English like for 4 weeks now. Before I'd never speak in English for never. So just
Oh wow,
watch
it's very
tutorial.
good.
Thank you. It's still I don't like that yet, but I'm starting to get used a little bit about that. So I hope to get better soon. at least maybe you can understand me, baby. But yeah, so, and of course it's always practice. So I'm also doing this kind of things. Yeah, so yeah, sometimes maybe by not being a mother tongue, it's a little bit harder. But yeah, I think it's not really a problem. We have our accent in my case, and that's it. So we can always get better at that. But thank you for what you're saying, because yeah, it's also helping me. Yeah, I like to have here people with way more knowledge than me on this field. So thank you again. Yeah, and of course all your part. Yeah, and by doing all this kind of public speech, finally you got in this wonderful podcast. So I think that you are happy about that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
See.
So yeah, now it makes sense for you everything. But thank you really, Nader. Yes, just a last question. Which socials do you use? Where can we found you? And which are maybe your plans for the future? Yeah, so we can end this. Thank you.
So Twitter, GitHub, and dev.to, I'm at Dabit3, so DABIT and the number 3. And then for YouTube, it's my first and last name, so it's YouTube/Nader Dabit. So you can find me YouTube, GitHub, Twitter, and dev.to. But my main place is probably Twitter and YouTube.
Yeah, and this is how I met you, basically, on Twitter. So yeah, I think that on Twitter there's a very big and friendly dev community. Because I found that basically this year. Before that, I was not that social person. So I started like in January or February by using Twitter, let's say a lot. But yeah, so I found very friendly developers, a lot of knowledge developer, also you. So yeah, so I think this is a very good place to stay, also to get some very good answers. I think I don't think it's a real replacement for Stack Overflow, but sometimes maybe you need maybe just some, you have maybe just a small questions, not that hard to explain. I think that if you get if you do the question properly, I think you can get an answer in the 99% of cases. If the question is good, is properly done. So it's also useful for you. I've also started using Twitter in a more useful way. I connected with all developers, also you. And yeah, so that's it. So thank you. Please follow Nader on Twitter, everywhere. Basically, we'll put some links in the description. And yeah, so thank you, Nader. Thank you again. Thank you for.
Thank you, Francesco. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. So do you want to say last thing for maybe some new developers? So they maybe are a bit lost. They want to start making maybe they get that invitation to a public speaking. They are thinking, should I do that? Sure, I should not do that. So what do you think? What would you say to them now?
Well, I mean, there's two things, I guess. One of them is as far as like doing something and completing it, finished is always better than perfect. So, or actually doing it is always better than having it perfect. So you'll, even if you don't get to a point where something's perfect, just try to get to a point where you feel like it's good enough, and then just do it, because you're never going to reach perfection. That's kind of the first thing. And then there's another thing that I would mention is like a really interesting idea in a book that I've read called The Obstacle is the Way, kind of like puts it into words, but an idea of like approaching the things that are the most uncomfortable and approaching the things that are the hardest a lot of times reap the biggest reward. So if you feel something is uncomfortable, but you want to do it, that's often a sign of something that you should do, and you should actually spend the time to do. Because I've found that when I approach those things typically have the highest reward, both personally, but also with my career and everything else. So keep those two things in mind, and I would say just go for it. And you never know until you try.
Thank you. I really needed this kind of words maybe before starting this kind of series. So I needed to think, I think for 3 days with myself. So should I do that? Should I do that? So maybe with those words, I would have started maybe two days earlier by doing this kind of stuff. So really thank you. You are a bit late, but thank you anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you again. It was awesome to be here.
Yeah. Also, I think it's a very great way to know another person. So yeah, so thank you again for being here, for all you said. I agree on everything. Yeah, good luck for everything, and that's it. So
Sounds good. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. See you next time. Bye bye.
Bye
Bye,
bye.
Nader. Bye. Let's stop.